What's up? Welcome back to my channel, Major League Tenacity. I'm Dave Robertson, your host, and today we're going to be reacting to an interview of Mahmood Mamdani. Mahmood Mamdani is the father of Mayor-elect of New York, Zohran Mamdani, and since a big chunk of what the content I want to make is around East Africa and things relating to East Africa, I thought he'd be a really good person to get a profile on. Dr. Mamdani actually gave Zohran the middle name Kwame after Kwame Nkrumah, a person very important to the Ghanaian independence movement. And he's kind of something of a Pan-Africanist, which I'm going to be perfectly honest, I did not expect to come from someone of South Asian descent. We're going to jump right into the interview. It's done by Al Jazeera. So yeah, this is a blind watch for me too. So I might be pausing and making my little commentary as we go along. So let's get into it.
This week on Upfront, I sit down with renowned scholar and author Mahmood Mamdani. I'll ask him how history can help us understand the present moment of rising authoritarianism and shifting global alliances. I'll also ask him about his son's election as mayor of New York City and what it says about race and identity in the United States. Mahmood Mamdani, thank you so much for joining us on Upfront.
Thank you for inviting me.
In your newly released book, Slow Poison, you return to Uganda, the place that both shaped you and turned on you after you were kicked out during the Asian expulsion in 1972. What made you come back to that story now?
Well, when I was kicked out, I was taken to a refugee camp in London. I spent about 6 months there, and then from there I went to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania to do my first academic job. And there I lived in a community of Ugandan exiles. I formed my associations there. I was part of study groups. I was part of political agitation groups. And when Amin was overthrown, it was natural to me that I would go back along with other Ugandan exiles. And so I went back. I never thought of going anywhere else, although that's kind of the starting point of the story. But the story is much bigger than that. It's really a story about it's a story about Uganda. It's a story about my generation of sort of first generation post-independence intellectuals. It's a story about our illusions and our hopes and our coming to life. It's a story where we begin by thinking that we're going to make revolution, and we are stopped dead in our tracks by the Rwanda genocide, which was no revolution. We learned. We had to grow up very fast, and we learned fast.
What does growing up mean? I mean, sometimes when I hear people say we had to grow up, it means they become cynical or they lose their radical imagination. Is it possible to have a kind of political maturity without losing hope for a radical new future?
Well, growing up in my case meant, and in the case of many of my friends, it meant shedding the romance with violence. And it meant thinking of violence in different ways. It meant thinking of other ways of effecting political change.
So before they go into the next part, if you don't know anything about Idi Amin, he was the dictator who ruled Uganda for a really long time, and he expulsed Asian people from the country for a variety of reasons, but kind of the folk reason amongst South Asians is that he had fallen in love with a South Asian woman, and her family whisked her away lest she be, caught up in the turbulent life of an African dictator. And as a sort of revenge, he kicked out the South Asian community in Uganda. Yeah, South Asians have had a really big impact on all of Africa, but especially in East Africa, like in Kenya, where I live part-time, and in Uganda, obviously, big South Asian community also in South Africa. But yeah, we're going to keep going.
It didn't mean dropping or becoming disillusioned with political change and withdrawing into a personal, private world. No, we were always part of the public world and wanting to change society. We still retain the impatience of wanting to change the world during our lifetime. But the methods changed.
In your book, you describe a kind of defining moment in your political awakening. You were in Montgomery, Alabama during the civil rights struggle, and you heard Dr. Martin Luther King talk about waging a struggle using prudence. Now, of course, he arrived in a suit and he was chauffeured in a Cadillac. You then heard James Foreman, in a very different register, say something that you never forgot. He said, "If you do not let us sit at the table of democracy, we will blow them legs off." How did that contrast shape the way that you understood political struggle and the differences between, say, reform and rupture?
Foreman appealed to my youth. He expressed the outrage that I felt. He gave voice to the impatience that I felt. King was prudent. King was like a sage. King was beckoning us to the future, saying, think before you step. Don't step first, and then ask yourself, what did I do? They fit like two parts of a single experience. It made sense to reflect one through the other, through the words of the other. I never felt that I had to choose between the two. I mean, Foreman was far more attractive. He was the proletarian agitator. Even whether it was the clothes he wore or the feet on which he walked over to where he spoke to us, or the words in which he spoke, he spoke to the young. King had seen much more. King had been tempered, and King was a little worried, I thought, about what the kind of youthful energy that we represented, where it could land up.
That day was an interesting day because you were also arrested that same day and taken to jail. And when you called the Ugandan ambassador,
it's kind of interesting. And it really frames to me a lot of Zohran's politics, knowing that his dad is an admirer of Martin Luther King, and actually spent time in the South during the civil rights movement in the United States. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that's interesting.
In Washington, D.C. for help, his response was fascinating to me. He asked you what you were doing interfering in the internal affairs of another country. You told him that this wasn't a foreign matter at all, and you compared it to Uganda's struggle for freedom. What was the connection that you were able to see at that time?
Just that, struggle for freedom. Of course, colonialism was at one level racial domination. So it connected very easily with what was going on in the American South. Colonialism was also not confined to one country. And the anti-colonial struggle wasn't confined to one country. In 1960s, early 60s, when the anti-colonial struggle reached its apex in Uganda, it was part of not just a continent-wide, but kind of a global movement. And we saw the civil rights struggle as part of that. We also understood, I mean, after all, Pan-Africanism had its anchor in this country, a very strong anchor, over decades and decades. So people thought of Africa not just at home, but also in the diaspora. And I was astonished that the ambassador would ask me what was I doing, interfering in the internal affairs of a foreign country.
I think some people found it hard to see the U.S. civil rights struggle as connected to this kind of global anti-colonial struggle because of the particular dynamics. Instead of it being a sort of outside European invader coming in and taking over, there's a much more complicated politics happening, or differently complicated politics happening in the United States, given legacies of slavery, given the kind of settler colonial project that was happening here. In the 21st century, do we have greater clarity about the global connections between various nation states and their internal struggles?
Well, we have Du Bois's famous statement that the salient question in the 20th century is the question of color and race. And that question united us. It didn't separate. Slavery, yes, was different, but different. It was the aftermath of African slavery in the US. These were two different phases, not totally two different experiences. Later on, I went to study slavery in greater depth and went on to look at the differences between what is known as slavery in Africa and slavery in North America. But that's for another book.
Yes, indeed. We can't wait to read that one too.
Yeah, wow. I'm really impressed at Dr. Mamdani's connection that he made from not only a Pan-African perspective, but from an anti-colonial perspective, and how he was able to recognize the similarities between, how Black people were treated during American slavery versus how Africans were treated, Black Africans were treated during European colonialism. It's very interesting, and if you ever get to travel to Africa, you'll notice that a lot of Africans have difficulty making that connection sometimes because, and what the Ugandan ambassador said, saying it's an internal matter, right? For the Ugandans, the British invasion was an external force imposing colonialism on them. They might not have necessarily seen the racial aspect of it. And again, you see that a lot with how Africans, treat certain things when they come to the United States. Perfect example, Somalis aligning with President Trump and then getting bit on the back end when he's saying, that they are, don't deserve to be in the country. So, Dr. Mamdani's ability to see that connection, especially after how he was treated by the Ugandan government, I'm very impressed that, most people would have probably developed some type of, resentment towards Black persons or Black Ugandans. But even in his revolutionary mindset, he kind of still understood, where the Ugandans might have been coming from after he returned.
Let's talk about this book a little bit more. As you mentioned earlier, the main focus of the book is Uganda. And in the West, Idi Amin, the former president of Uganda, is almost exclusively portrayed, maybe even caricatured, as a butcher, a madman, almost the embodiment of our collective understanding of African savagery. Hollywood, especially through films like Last King of Scotland, have sort of cemented that image, in fact. Of course, many human rights groups report that Amin and his security forces were indeed responsible for killing anywhere from 100,000 to maybe even 500,000 Ugandans. What does Hollywood and the Hollywood version of Idi Amin get wrong?
At one level, Amin was not far from how Hollywood portrays him. Amin was trained as a child soldier by the British. Amin was trained as a mercenary. He was trained in what is known as the arts and the technique of counterinsurgency, which is a polite name for state terrorism. And Amin was a state terrorist in the service of the British in Kenya, in northeastern Uganda, in different places. And he learned to murder, to torture, to kill. All of this was during the British colonial period, under British tutelage. Amin's worst killings were done in the first year after his coup, when his advisors were British and Israelis. And the British and the Israelis had slight disagreement on how he should go about consolidating the coup. And the Israelis were far more compelling in their argument that really you have to kill not just Obote, but his entire cohort, all those who comprise his commanders and his military elite. Because if you don't, the reckoning will be round the corner. And the worst killings Amin did, he did under the British and the Israelis. In the first year after the coup, in the barracks, killing Obote soldiers in the hundreds. Cumulatively, thousands.
Last year, you stated that we're witnessing a kind of revival of the non-aligned movement formed during the Cold War by countries that chose not to align with or against any major power bloc. What forces are driving this resurgence, and will this change Africa's strategic position in a multipolar world?
Big questions. I'll give you small answers. The first, I think we start with the lessons African leaders drew from the Cold War. During the Cold War, they joined one side as opposed to the other. At the end of the Cold War, they learned that you didn't have to join only one side. You could play the drum on both sides. You should actually talk to both. The Africans understand that to the extent they are interested in economic development, their preferred partner would be the Chinese. The US had nothing to give them. To the extent that they wanted to stay in power and their primary concerns were security, their preferred partner would be the US, because the US was interested in asserting its military dominance throughout the continent, if not throughout the world. So that was the deal. Then I think step two was the creation of something akin to the non-aligned movement. Brazil, China, South Africa, Russia, India, like that. So that's step two, expanding its ranks, bringing in more and more people into it. I think they've also learned something from the non-aligned period, which is the non-aligned period was led by a movement which was far more politically oriented. And this time around, they're trying to start by defining a common ground, which is more connected with development, more connected with reforming the global economy, more connected with global currencies, and things like that. So it's a step-by-step. It's slower, and it's a learning process, deliberately so.
Before they go into the next section, earlier Dr. Mamdani was talking about Idi Amin being trained by the British and the Israelis in counterinsurgency. The United States does something similar with the School of the Americas and with U.S. Special Forces. Now, depending on how certain things are and the current political situation, either or can be, those institutions can be good or bad, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, it's very interesting from a, as an American, we don't usually think about the United States as an empire. But, seeing these institutions, on the British side as well, and doing the same type of anti-insurgency work in Africa, it kind of it really helped for me. It kind of made me recognize, was making me recognize more about how America really does function like an empire. If you want to look at some more stuff about the School of the Americas, Abby Martin did a lot of work on that. I might put a link to some of her stuff about the School of the Americas in the description. And another thing he's talking about is, a non-aligned movement. He mentioned how, if you want to stay in power, you align with the West. If you want to develop economically, you align with China. It's really interesting how, you can watch certain countries trying to make that balance where they try and play with the U.S. a little bit to stay in power, but also play with China a little bit to get the economic development. I think Kenya's done a really good job of striking that balance between appeasing the United States and appeasing China. And, this whole non-aligned thing, we're seeing a little bit more of that start to come up with the Sahel states, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, kind of making their own alliance, separate from ECOWAS. We have the alliance between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I'm really curious, though, why something similar like that hasn't started to develop in East Africa, because ironically enough, there's more, in my opinion, just as a casual observer, more reason for them to kind of work together. You take, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and even part of the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Everyone kind of speaks Swahili. There's a bit of a, a lingua franca, a regional lingua franca, and most of the people in the regions are Bantu or somewhat related culturally. There was, the Swahili trade routes way back in the day. So it's really interesting to see how these non-aligned movements. He also mentioned some. He didn't say it explicitly, but he was talking about BRICS, how these movements that kind of try to break away from the Western or the classical Western world order, how they kind of function. So I don't know. It's just interesting to me to kind of watch.
Multipolarity opening up new possibilities for African agency, or, as some of us fear, does it risk simply replacing one set of hegemons for another?
Well, it can end up with the latter, replacing one master with another, or with some others. But it can also open up space. It can give you insight into where the different masters disagree, and what are the different possibilities they can allow you. So it continues to be a learning process, in my view.
How do you negotiate that, though, if you're an African leader? How do you avoid getting caught between old Western powers and these new geopolitical actors like China?
China does not have a history of military involvement. China's history is of commercial involvement, and its ambitions are commercial. It's shy of military involvement, which is good for Africa. It has a couple of bases, but it's not very clear what these bases are meant for, whether they're meant to support Chinese soldiers involved in peacekeeping, quote, peacekeeping, UN peacekeeping, or whether they have a hidden agenda for the future. But I think Africans are a little more comfortable with China.
I'm going to turn a little more to the personal side of things. I'm sure you're aware your son, Zohran Mamdani, is set to become New York's mayor.
I was wondering when that was going to come up.
Are you at a stage now where everyone asks you those questions?
It's not a stage. It seems like my condition in life now.
How does that feel?
Well, he is my son, and he has done some amazing things. But he's there, and he can speak for himself. And I am very aware that I should not be presuming to speak for him.
So with that in mind, I'm going to use your brilliant political lens to help me make sense of him like we would any other political figure. There's a lot of panic in some circles because of his rise. Why do you think that is?
As they say, he came out of nowhere. And we say, what do you mean nowhere? We know exactly where he came out of. He came out of somewhere. But that somewhere is just not part of your lens.
What is that somewhere?
That somewhere is the part of the population, the part of the electorate which has been excluded from political processes. That somewhere is part of the world which has been looked at as of no significance. I mean, he came out of Africa. You know, he came out of Uganda. He spent his early teenage in South Africa. I mean, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. At the time of the end of the anti-apartheid struggle, at a time when the moral compass was gauged by not just the anti-apartheid struggle, but by your solidarity with Vietnam. And he has now moved into a period in which it is Palestine which defines the moral compass of the world.
If he emerges out of Europe rather than Africa, do you think the response is any different?
Of course. It would have been very different. It would have been taken as a continuation of the great migrations into the US. It would not have been taken as an uppity sort of move into something nobody expected, coming out of nowhere. I mean, that phrase says everything.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and it completely reframes my opinion, I guess. I mean, not completely, but like, I'm a Zohran Mamdani fan. I didn't vote in the election because I'm not a resident of New York. I'm from New York. I'm visiting my family here, but I wasn't able to vote in the election. I would have voted for him if I could have, but a lot of the language that Dr. Mamdani is using and that the interviewer is using, I've seen some of his videos before. His name is escaping me right now. Is very reminiscent of, African American vernacular, like uppity, talking about the Great Migration. I'm just shocked that how very American and African the Mamdanis, at least from what I'm seeing in this interview, are. And it's cool that he's in New York City, so he's maybe I'll shoot him an email or something.
He also symbolizes a kind of breaking with the old school political consensus, like this whole generation has done in some ways. Help me make sense of that a little bit more. What are they breaking from?
Well, he's turned the political world upside down. He symbolizes integrity. He symbolizes honesty. He symbolizes sticking to his principles. Even when he met President Trump, he was not willing to just turn the page and say something different. No, he stuck to his principles. He symbolizes a politics which acknowledges adversaries without turning them into enemies. He symbolizes a new hope that we can live with difference. He marries the embrace of universal principles with the embrace of difference.
There are people who are already losing a little bit of that hope He says that he wants or hopes that Hakeem Jeffries will be the Speaker of the House. Obviously, he's been a pro-Zionist for a very long time. He's holding on to the New York City Police Commissioner, who's had some very problematic positions. You know firsthand sort of what it means for a leader to rise and then have to govern and negotiate the kind of realpolitik. What do you say to people who say he's already compromising too much?
Depends on what you mean by compromise. He's come out of an election, a campaign, mobilization, where he was able to neutralize the power of big money. But now we are in the period of governance. That is where big money has a telling presence. You cannot neutralize it easily because that's how this world runs. And then he has to now recognize that it's not going to be a clear division between those who vote for you and those who don't vote for you, those who vote against you. There's going to be a lot of middle ground. A lot of views, people who don't just agree or disagree with you, but who have their own misgivings about some things and not about others. It also means that you have to build alliances. He's not the president of the US, he's the mayor of New York City. He's part of a local government. He's got above him the governor, he's got above him the president of the US. He has to build alliances. If he's thinking of achieving anything, and I don't think we should be judged by his overtures to Hakeem Jeffries or to the police commissioner, you can't change everything overnight. You've got to decide what comes first. I would wait for his inaugural address because that will be an opportunity for him to state his priorities. I would wait for that before deciding whether he's making compromises right now.
Really, really, really good points. And the great part is he's commenting as a very astute political observer, even though he's talking about his own son. Zohran, a lot of people, Zohran's a very principled. He's very, he's charming, but he's also an incredibly astute, no doubt, because of his dad, or contributes of his dad. He's an astute political operator, and I think a lot of the criticisms that get levied against Zohran are excessive, especially considering the place of that he's operating from. As he's effectively a municipal executive. I think it's kind of plays I think into a dichotomy of, oh my God, you've come, this guy came out of nowhere. He's got such a weird background. He's African. Is he really African? Oh, but is he Indian? Oh, he's Muslim. He's not really American. Blah 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 blah. To he's expected to also change the world at the same time. When the reality is, just like his dad said, he's a municipal chief executive of the largest, wealthiest city in the United States. That's it. At the end of the day, and there's a cap. Because of his birth in Africa, there's a cap to how far he can realistically go in the United States. Politically, like he could probably become the governor of New York. He could probably get into the Senate. He could get into the Congress. But a lot of the sweeping change that people seem to be hoisting on him has to also come with some level of teamwork within the Democratic Party or another party that comes after him. And there's got to be someone else, if we're talking about the presidency, that takes the helm, because he's not eligible to become president of the United States. So you got to think small if you're going to make progress where he is, and he still hasn't even become mayor yet.
In your book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, you examine how U.S. political culture constructs certain Muslims as threats and others as acceptable. Do you see Zohran's election as signaling a shift in how Muslim identity is understood in American public life, or are we still constrained by the good Muslim, bad Muslim binary?
There's an overlap between the 9/11 legacy, which is very evident in the Islamophobia that was rampant through this election, and in the openness to diversity. After all, he did not hide the fact that he was a Muslim. He was very open about it, and he was able to win over even a significant section of the young Jewish community. So I say even because that's where a Muslim is painted as automatically anti-Semitic. And he was able to overcome it.
What does that ability to overcome make you think or feel about the future of U.S. politics, or maybe even global politics?
Well, I don't want to get too optimistic. I do think that this is a phase. It was an election. It has taught me one thing, which is that America is a complicated place with different possibilities, contradictory possibilities, even extreme possibilities. Alongside fascist gangs, you have anti-fascist mobilizations. But I understand and I realize that the right has mobilized far more effectively than the progressives or the left have. They've not really gone anywhere beyond the written text. So I'm open to learning.
We all should be. Professor Mamdani, thank you so much for joining us on Upfront.
So that's the interview. I'm blown away. Yeah, Dr. Mamdani is really, really impressive. And I think, seeing that really bodes well for what is, what New York has to look forward to in their mayor-elect. All right, that was it. I hope you enjoyed this little video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I look forward to making more content for y'all in the future. Have a good one.